All right, and Peter would like to start with a Q&A section first. So if you have any questions you would like to ask, please raise your hand. And when you're asking your question, please say your name first. So are there any questions?
Hi, my name is Nancy Tong. I'm a visiting associate professor here at Hong Kong U. I have a question. How did you come up with this idea? And can you tell us a little bit of how this idea evolved into this film?
I wanted to go to Burma since I started making films in 2003. All my films are about human rights issues. Why? It's just, that's what I do. Sometimes I say it's because of my background. I was born in Czechoslovakia in '68, and then we had to flee the country because the Russians invaded that same year. But I don't know if that's really true or not. But that's my story. But so I wanted to go to Burma since I started making films. It was impossible. There were some people who did these, kind of go across the border, do little reportages with some of the people working in the rebel areas, or these kind of undercover journalistic accounts when you're there for a week. But it was really impossible to stay long-term in the country and make a serious film. That started to change when things started to open up from the dictatorship around 2011. So we had an opportunity in 2012. We came across that the first Human Rights Film Festival was being established in Yangon. So we thought, wow, we want to go. So we sent our film in that played here, this film that you mentioned graciously, thank you, Back to the Square about the Egyptian Revolution. We sent it in and we lobbied really hard to be invited. And we got invited. And it was amazing to show a film like that there. There was such a hunger and thirst and curiosity about human rights in general. And also I gave a one-day masterclass there, and that was amazing. And so the festival invited us to come back for a couple months to teach new film students how to make their first human rights films. They wanted 40-minute films from beginners. It's like, wow, okay. So we went and we moved to Burma basically with the intention of making a film. And then so we wanted to make a film when we went there right away. And why did we choose poetry? It's not that, it's because we love poetry more than anything on the planet. I mean, I love literature. But I wouldn't choose out of the blue to make a film about poetry for no reason. We chose poetry. My wife was doing research before we went, and she had read that there's so many poets in Burma, that everybody can recite a poem to you almost, and that most people are at least amateur poets. And she was intrigued, and so we thought, we'll wonder if that's true. And it was true, and that was quite amazing. So that's why we chose the subject. But we also we have to be careful when we're picking subjects. Burma was a place that's semi-closed society. You don't, in fact, know how open it is, but it's pretty closed, especially when we started. So we want to make a film. So how are we going to make a film that touches upon urgent issues and tells you something more about the country's political situation, although hopefully it's a timeless one in the film, and without getting thrown out? So you better have a good story. And poetry seemed like a pretty harmless and effective way to do that. Because poetry, who cares? So that's the story, yeah. And then things went from there, of course. Then how do you turn poetry, we could also talk about that, into a film? It's very hard. Quite a lot. In fact, we filmed with about 17. There's only, I think, 12 poets in the film now, 11. And we thought, and some of their poetry is kind of chopped up in the film. We only use like half of a poem. How horrible for a poet. But they all agreed. We told them before, look, it's film, so the film kind of cinematic language has to come first. Would you mind if we would use a few lines? And everybody said, yeah, it's okay. And mainly because we were introduced through, you see there's a poetry consultant, King Ong-A. He's the fellow who's reading the poem on the bus in Yangon. And so basically, those were our guides to help us orient us in poetry in Burma. So, but basically, we wanted to do a lot more with the film. And part of it now is we're going to make a book. We're publishing a book at the end of May with one of the most famous photographers in the Netherlands. She did beautiful portraits of all the poets. And it'll have all the poetry in the film plus other ones by the poets in their biographies. And we're also doing we're planning to, because we think it's a pretty important film for the country. We think it could help Burma heal a lot and start to talk about things like transitional justice in a kind of gentle way. So we want to set up now a free mobile cinema tour for the film throughout the whole country. And our goal is to reach about 2 million people. Because there's this Human Rights Film Festival had a traveling film festival. They stopped doing it now, and they were able to reach about 5,000 people per screening. So that's kind of our goal. So that's enough on that. Who else? More questions? And then we'll show some clips so we move along. Any other questions? Maybe 2 or 3 more, and then I'll show a clip. Yeah, please. Sorry, I'm taking all this space.
Well, I was wondering, before we take the second question, because we were talking about Peter want to know who the audience are.
Please, thanks for reminding.
Yeah, so I was wondering if you identify as a filmmaker, or if you want to be a filmmaker, can you raise your hand? Okay, good. Because we are wondering how much like film techniques that we would like to explore in the lecture. So, okay, thank you.
And so so that's about 40%, 35, and the other 65% of people. Why are you here? Like, why didn't you go home after the screening? What do you want to learn? What do you want to know? More about human rights. Anybody else, just yell it out. Don't even put your hand up. It's faster. Yeah. About the Rohingya. Okay, sure. Anyone else? How you craft a story. About storytelling in general. Oh, wow. Okay, anyone else? Okay, that's great for now. And those people who are, then I'll try to answer all these, but maybe then, okay, let's start with this, and then I ask the filmmakers or people who want to be filmmakers what they want to know. But just 3 questions here. A question about the Rohingya. If people follow the situation, probably most of you know, the Rohingya are the Muslim minority in Burma who are having a really lousy time, right? Tremendously persecuted minority. Unfortunately, the Rohingya subject didn't get into our film. So, and many people ask us why. The short answer is we didn't want to give you a short film. It's such a sensitive subject that would have taken a whole entirely different approach, and we probably wouldn't have been able to make the film that we're making now. So, and it's such a big subject that we also think to do it justice, you would probably want to only focus on that issue because it's such an important one. So that's the answer to that question. The second question was about storytelling. I guess that was, But I think maybe we can explore that throughout the whole class. But how do you do that? It's both easy and difficult. Kind of like everything. In a good film, it's got to feel effortless. So you can tell me, your film wasn't really, but that's what the goal is. And that's really hard. There's a couple of things. The most basic one is casting of characters. That's really difficult. And how do you teach that? You kind of don't. You learn it by trial and error. You want someone who's charismatic on camera, but charisma can be many things. It can be quiet charisma of someone you don't notice at all at the start. It can be someone who doesn't talk a lot. It can be someone who does talk a lot. It's how their eyes look. And these are all the kind of things that you figure out by practice and then often in the editing room, because you're always making mistakes. You're often deceived by people who become your friends. In my experience, my friends tend not to become such great characters because I like them too much and I'm blinded to see them objectively. So there's always a bit of that. But so character casting is very important. But most simply and fundamentally, you need a story. And I like to make films where something happens in front of the camera and I have to be there to see it happen. And for me, that's the most exciting kind of filmmaking. When something really happens and so I most of the things I do is cinema verite. So you shoot and you take long takes and you're like fishing, big theme in the film, right? Waiting and waiting and waiting. What's going to happen, I wonder. And you often get it wrong. I would say for now, there's kind of 3 issues. What's the subject that you choose and why? And most importantly, when you're making the film, you better not hurt anybody, especially the people that you're filming. And that's always something you got to be in your head the whole time, because things can go very, very wrong really fast, especially if you're working in a closed society. And the risks are always not the biggest for you as a filmmaker, especially when you're an outsider, because usually the worst thing that will happen to you is you'll be kicked out, but not the people who will be left behind. So lots of things to think about all the time. So very quickly, the people who are interested in becoming filmmakers or are already filmmakers, what do you want to learn? Why are you here? 2 or 3 points, yeah.
How much time did you spend with your character
Okay.
to reach this level of intimacy?
Okay, yeah.
Cry in front of the camera
Yeah,
and be comfortable with that.
okay. Maybe I'll ask 2 more questions before I answer those together. Any other questions? Yeah.
How do you find the family who
Yeah.
were in the films, and do you know how to speak the language
Okay.
of the Burma?
Yeah.
Language, and how you make them to be in your documentary?
Okay. So I won't forget the third one. I'll just answer the 2. What was the first question? How long? Well, I'm a firm believer in just shooting right away. Some people, they say, "Oh no, I leave the camera at home for the first 2 months, and then kind of film later." I think, what a waste of time. You're a filmmaker, so don't pretend. Don't, I'm going to drop by and maybe later I bring the camera. That's kind of, I think, just because you're shy. Even if you're shy, just bring the camera. Start filming, and it's actually very good because you'll realize a whole bunch of things. First of all, if they don't want to be filmed, you'll learn in a hurry. You won't waste your time or theirs. Secondly, it takes sometimes longer and shorter to get used to a camera. That really depends with people. With this family, this was the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me in my whole entire life, I have to say. And I have to actually tell you that we just came back from Burma now. We were so fortunate when we were invited to the Hong Kong Film Festival that we said, well, would you mind if we would fly through Bangkok on the way? And they said, yeah, that's okay. So because of their generosity, we were able to basically go to Burma now for 5 days. And we went to Patane, to Mangom Puent, the old poet's house. And the scenes you see when we're filming inside his living room, we put up a screen and a beamer, someone lent us, and we showed them the film in the same place that you see in the film. So that was basically, I have shivers when I just talk about it. It's really the most amazing thing I've ever done. Both my wife and I agreed. We said it was better than when we got married. But it was really so special. It was like you make a film and then you're able to go back to the people that you made it for and show it to them. And even better than that, the son who's in Finland, someone watched the film in the cinemas in the Netherlands, and they paid for his ticket to go back to Burma so he could see the film together with his parents. So he was there too. So it was just emotionally unbelievable. But digressing, just to your question, when we met Mangom Puent, it's what we say in the title cards is what happened. He said, let's make a long poem together, right when we met him. So there was a level of trust and openness and acceptance right when he met me. So one reason for that is that we were introduced to him by the head of the Human Rights Festival, who knows him for a long time, so someone is vouching for you already. But the other one, and I felt this magical thing with him, is that I'm meeting, we're going to be friends because you really like me and I really like you. And when you look into his eyes, but you feel that in the film. He's just such an extraordinary human being. And of course, part of that is that he's old and fragile, and he's also lacked recognition for a lot of his life for what he does. So someone, for the first time, it really wants to listen. So a combination of factors, but basically very fortunate. So sometimes it takes much, much longer. Usually I find when I'm filming, you find kind of as the months progress, the material gets better because people become more comfortable around you. And that was certainly the case with some people in the film, like maybe Senz Otwe, who's doing the meditation walk, that at first he was kind of stiff and camera self-conscious, but that's more about his relation to the camera rather than to the filmmaker. So the second question, I forgot it too.
And
yeah, how did we find them? Well, we were basically, the head of the Human Rights Film Festival told me, she said, I know a poet that you have to meet, and that's Mangom Puent. And the reason is because he's basically what he says too is the most respected, well-known dissident poet in the country. So he's an esteemed person. But it's a funny story, actually. We were at a conference in Norway on freedom of expression a year before we made the film, and there was a Burmese dissident there named Zarganar, who's quite famous. He's the most famous stand-up comedian in the country, who was put in jail many times. So he gave a performance. A lot of the artists it was about creative freedom of expression, and a lot of the artists were performing. And he gave a performance where he recited a poem about not being able to see the moon inside his jail cell, so he peed on the ground so he could see the moon reflected in his urine. And we thought that kind of made a big impression. And then we said that to some people in Burma and said, oh, well, that's not his poem. He stole it or adapted it from Mang Puint, who wrote this poem, which was much less vulgar, about dropping a bucket of water so he could see the moon's reflection. So it's funny how kind of things move together. You kind of define people. But I am also a strong believer in filmmaking and luck. And how do you get lucky? Put in the time. Time equals luck. That really does. So you'll get lucky if you put in more and more time. Then things will come to you. Yeah. Let's watch a quick clip. So it's not just talking. So I thought maybe I show you 2 clips that were cut from Burma Storybook that didn't make it into the cut. And the reason I want to show you these is at least 2 things. One is on storytelling, one is on human rights. So how do you film things to tell a story without telling the story? Or maybe without being boring. Boring is, tell me about human rights in your country. Nobody wants to watch that. And that's not creative documentary. That's journalism, which serves its purpose, but it's not a creative enterprise. It's an information enterprise. But for me, documentary is supposed to be cinema. And cinema is the realm of emotion. Okay? So you're dealing with emotional storytelling. And one particular way of doing that is through observational filming. So you're looking for stuff to happen.
So I was wondering about the mode of how you work, because you mentioned that you like to use the technique of cinema verite, and so more observational. So I was wondering, like, if you put the camera there, right, for a long time, usually the result is that you have a lot of footage, right? So can I ask, what is the ratio, like between, you know, what you have in the movie and what you have at your hand as the footage?
Yeah, the shooting ratio for this film was much too high. It was 200 to 1. We shot 200 hours.
So my next question is, how do you organize them? So for
It's
example,
a nightmare.
after you shoot, do you like take notes? How do you organize this material, and how do you go through them?
Well, if you saw the credit list, there's a whole phone book of translators in the film. It was a lot of people. But the shooting ratio was so high because it took us because the subject was poetry. It took us a long time to figure out how to turn that subject. It's a good subject, but how do you turn that into a film? And that took quite a while to find out. I mean, we were shooting for, I guess, 5 months before we met Mang Puint. And then at that point, we did consider thinking, oh, let's just make a simple story about his family. But we thought that would be kind of a conventional film in its form. And particularly my wife, she always wants to do something new and something we haven't done before and something challenging. So she said, well, no, we should really make a global film about a small story, but also about poetry in general. So how do you combine those 2 things? And how do you tell a story in form as a long poem, too? So that was a challenge. And it's also because we don't speak the language, one, and because it's about poetry, a lot of it that is not translated yet becomes translated after you've filmed it, about half of it. You just end up shooting a lot and too much. Yeah. Any questions on what you watched? Okay. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question on language. You spoke about capturing 200 hours of footage. Does that footage need to be essentially translated before you even know what you have? Because you say about getting lucky in the moment, but essentially if you don't speak the language, you're not totally in the moment because you kind of have to wait until after to know what was caught on camera.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, that was the earlier question I forgot too. Do you speak the language? No, I don't speak Burmese. And in fact, I don't speak any of the Burmese languages. In this film, there's at least five languages. There's 3 or 4 scenes that are in different ethnic languages that are not, because Burmese is the Burman language, 65% majority speaking. That's the national language. But Burma is a country of, they say, 135 ethnic minorities with 135 different languages. So, but nonetheless, no, we don't speak any languages. So, yes, all of it needs to be translated before you can assess the material. Sometimes that leads to very funny stories, like the monk in love story. That was initially translated. The translator said, I can't understand what they're saying, it's too noisy. And it's kind of like, the translation came back and it was like, this is boring. What are these people talking about? I don't care what they're saying, and they don't care what they're saying according to the translation. I don't know. I can't remember how it was translated, but certainly nothing about being in love. And then I watching it again, I'm like, that can't be right. This was a good scene. You talk about, you know, knowing you've got something good. I was at a monastery. This was we met a young monk, and this is a monastery run by the most famous Buddhist monk in Burma called Wiratu. Maybe you've heard about him. He was on the cover of Time magazine. He's an extremist monk who hates the Rohingya, and he hates the Muslim minority. So he's been in jail for that from the previous government, and then he's been resuscitated. Now he runs this. He's head of this. It's called the 969 Mabata movement, which is an extremist Buddhist movement. Complicated story. Maybe a lot of you wonder how that works. But that's his monastery. So we were initially intrigued and thought, oh, and we met this young monk who wanted to practice his English, and I filmed a couple of days with him, and then I went in. There's the morning prayers or the morning study session, and I just filmed a half an hour, just one shot with these monks. I don't know what they're saying, but they seem pretty intuitive of what they're saying. And then you get closer, and that's the magical thing about Burma, that I can get closer. I'm 2 meters away from them with the camera like this, and they don't mind that I'm filming. You could see some acknowledgement, not just the camera, but a couple of times they look into the camera. So, but it's okay, I'm filming, and so we thought, well, we have to give this to another translator, and then you get this wonderful story about that guy, a monk who wants to leave the monastery. Amazing. So often you'll get the material back later, but often when it's really good, it's really good most of the time. And why? It's practice, I guess, intuition. You can feel when people are into something, but so how about the second scene, the first one, the young boy monk on the bus with the bus driver. That was a bit of, we talk about cinema verite, but that doesn't mean I'm super strict and will never direct anything. No, why not? I'm on this bus, actually. I'm traveling with Sanzotwe, the fellow who's doing the meditation walk, because I filmed about 10 hours with him of these psychotherapy sessions for the former political prisoners. It's like 2-minute scene in the film, right? With the former prisoner who's afraid of the rain. So he's doing this with this association of former political prisoners doing counseling. So I'm traveling with him to one of these counseling sessions. And he's chatting with this bus driver, and then the bus driver is talking to the young boy monk, and everybody seems to laugh. And my camera's not out. So I take out my camera and I say, can you make him tell the same joke again? And he does. And it was like, wow. I didn't even know what the joke was, but everybody seemed to think it was really funny. So that's how the scene comes out. And then you discover these wonderful things, that it's not just a joke about drinking beer, but it tells you a story about the Civil War, longest running Civil War in the country, right? It tells you a story about child soldiers, which are a big problem, right? So that's how you discover things, and that's the ways of telling stories. Yeah. Even though, because it's cinema verite, often you won't get everything, right? Maybe you don't know there's a civil war in Burma, right? Or with the monks in love, when he says, I want to protect my religion, maybe you don't know what that means, because that means basically protect it from other religions. So, but that's part of the fun of filming. Yeah.
In relation to the issue of language, I just want to add that I think that Peter's filmmaking is quite amazing because you really work across language and culture.
Yeah.
So not only this film, but Peter
Yeah.
also filmed in Egypt, in Xinjiang,
Yeah.
right, and in Southeast Asia. So many different places.
Yeah.
And what I really find interesting, especially in Burma Storybook, is that the vision that you have, the cinematic vision that you have, and also that kind of texture of everyday life being represented. And sometimes I wonder, it could, perhaps because you don't speak the language, so you really pay a lot of attention to the gesture of humans and like the interactions between people, but outside of understanding what they are saying. So I think that's quite amazing. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about the idea of creative documentary. Because you mentioned a little bit about that. And it seems different from the kind of cinematography style. And I think that it's the idea of creative nonfiction in terms of writing is also getting quite popular.
Yeah.
So I just wonder, like, perhaps how much kind of direction that you give in this film, for example, and how do you, how do you organize that, or how do you plan that?
A lot of questions. Thank you. About language, basically, I think it's much easier if you're going to film in the language you speak. I look. You kind of see patterns by looking back at your life in general. And so my pattern is, oh gosh, I've made 6 films now in countries that I didn't speak the language. Why did I do that? I don't know. It just kind of worked out that way. The next film, we're saying with my wife that we're really going to make a film in a language we speak, because we speak a bunch of them together. So I'll let you know. Maybe the 7th film you'll have a different understanding. But certainly I believe in instinct in filmmaking. I used to be in the intellectual business. I was a professor of philosophy, and then I quit to make films, so that's my background. But for me, filmmaking is got nothing to do with the head. It's all about feeling. Now, you better make sure your films aren't stupid, because no one will watch them. But they really, to connect to an audience, it has to connect to the heart. And maybe that's what you learn from poetry too. I mean, I'm editing this book now. We have to put in the final draft to the publisher in about a week. So I'm reading this interview with Mang On Point, who says poetry is all about feelings. The form, people are interested in form. All that stuff's irrelevant. It's only about feelings. That's what's crucial. And I think filmmaking is a bit like that too. But the question of language is one. The other one on creative storytelling, I think I'm learning by doing, and I'm also learning by collaborating with my wife for sure. Maybe it's useful to show you 1 or 2 clips from the previous film we made before this one, which was kind of a training exercise. Because my wife and I are together for 7 years, and this is she helped me a lot with the first Egyptian Revolution film, but our real collaborations have now been on the last 2 films. The film we made before this one was called Ana Ana, which means I am me in Arabic. And while I was making this first film about the revolution, Back to the Square, from 2012, my wife decided to teach a self-portrait video workshop for young Egyptian artists in Egypt in the first year following the revolution. So she was coaching them to do self-portraits. And from these self-portraits, we then picked 4 young women artists and made a film together with them. And they shot half of the material. So even though I say I do cinema verite all the time, this film was only about 20% cinema verite, and it was at first largely based on interviews. So let me just show you maybe clip 4. Should we do both of them? Yeah, let's do both of them. This is like, let's please show clip 4 and clip 5. So clip 4 and 4, we just asked them, we should give you the background before. I'm getting chased out of here. We did long monologues with these 4 young women that were a couple hours each. And they were also the result of working with them over a period of a year, where they would get so comfortable looking directly into the lens that it no longer became an interview, but a free-form dialogue with the camera. So that's one of the initial scene in the film. And then the second one is because it was based on them filming a lot of the material themselves is a clip of how we put that material together. So two clips. Yeah. Who the question was? Who's the photographer? The characters filmed about. Initially, the idea was for them to film the whole thing. From this workshop, there was like the agreement was that they would like anything they wanted to contribute to a collective archive, and then they would give us the freedom to construct and edit that in any way we wanted. But the experiment didn't really work out that way, because basically they didn't film enough in the end for different reasons. So we decided, let's film some too. So and in the end, it was about 50% us and 50% them, more or less. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, we also showed you this clip with the drawers that's made by the young woman who's in the pink at the end, Wafa, who writes a poem. I mean, the question that they needed to reflect on in front of the camera is, would you see, who are you? How would you answer that question? Yeah, she's a photographer. She's extraordinarily talented. And it looks like a macro lens, right? Getting so close. Well, actually, she doesn't have a macro lens. So what did she do? She took her lens and turned it upside down and put it against the camera backwards. And that's how she got what we showed you. Yeah. So, but this was a film. It's a smaller film, but it was useful as an exercise for us to think about documentary storytelling. And well, basically turning a poem as a poem, how to do that. So that's what we did. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting.
Yeah.
I hope you don't mind being there alone. I mean, the
No, it's
spotlight
fine.
is so strong.
No,
I
it's
couldn't
very
see
bright.
anybody
Sure.
from the
I can
stage.
stand up too if you like.
So basically,
Sure, why
some
don't I
of the
do that? That's
footages are
much
actually
nicer.
generated from the video workshop then. That your wife taught the
Yeah.
women, right?
Yeah.
It's quite amazing, and I think that when you mention like the film, I mean, one of the women is very creative in doing the things.
All of
so
them are really. You
interesting.
see, there's four young women in the film. And,
Yeah. So it's very interesting, like first person, almost like first person.
It was meant to be like that, and the goal was, it's a way maybe similar to what we were trying to do in Burma Storybook, was to, how do you capture things you don't see? So in this film of Anna is what you don't see is what's really inside your heart. Who are you? Particularly as a young Egyptian woman who is not allowed to show a lot of the things that they talk about or try to express or show in the film. What's really deep inside your heart? Especially, how do you try to show your creativity and express that and where it comes from? Yeah.
It's good. So now I'm going to throw a difficult question about human rights, actually.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe some of the audience would also like to know more, because you kind of think about your filmmaking very much related to human rights. But we all know like the idea of human rights could be abstract in a way, and it also talks about very different kinds of rights. So I was wondering, how do you, perhaps in your filmmaking process, how do you feel, like how do you kind of go through all these textures or experiences of people, right, and then organize them in terms of human rights? I guess that's my question. But also I wonder, like, maybe your idea of human rights, did it change over more than a decade of filmmaking, right? The reason I ask this is that because I do some research on China and also films and film festivals, some of the feminist and queer film festivals. Something I find very interesting is that the notion of human rights was quite sensitive in China, right? So people translate them in different ways. So for example, there's the notion of 权利, or there could be the
what does
notion.
That mean?
It means rights, but different translation. The other is more like 权益, 权益. So it's more about like benefits, like depoliticized way to talk about rights. So in order for the government to accept that what they are up for. So I was wondering, like, because you have all this background in like political
Yeah.
science,
Yeah.
right? So all these philosophical backgrounds. So I was
Yeah.
wondering, in your filmmaking process,
Yeah.
right? Does that do you have like questions coming up about
Oh.
definitions of human rights, for example? Yeah.
Not so much. I mean, in that way, filmmaking is pretty primitive, I guess, because or maybe I'm not a sophisticated filmmaker that way. Is that certainly you probably could make a very interesting film that would explore these kind of questions. To what extent are, I think if I get it right, questions of human rights universal? To what extent are they culturally specific? To what extent is there debates about, when people have disagreements about this? I mean, I don't know. For example, people used to talk a lot about Asian values a while ago. Now less, right? But for example, when I was an academic, one of my big mentors was a Latvian scholar named Judith Sklar at Harvard. And she wrote a bunch of beautiful essays about trying to figure out, well, how do you justify human rights, in a postmodern world where people used to think, well, you can think about these stuff as derived through reason, why we're all should be free, why should all be respected as individuals, why do we have dignity? And there's big debates about that, right? Philosophically. But she said, look, it's pretty simple. Everybody wants to live free from cruelty. Nobody wants to be politically, nobody wants to be at the receiving end of political cruelty. And that's maybe kind of universal and is an answer in all the films I make, kind of.
Maybe just
Yeah.
let me add a little bit background to
Yeah.
what you mentioned about the Asian value debate,
Yeah, sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because if I remember it right,
Yeah.
it's about some of the governments in Asia, right? Basically saying that we should stick to Asian values.
Yeah, it came out
And
of
then-
Singapore in the 80s.
Right.
And mainly
Instead
talking-
of the
yeah.
universal human rights.
And arguing that there's a debate about what's the relation between the community and the individual. So big questions like that. But filmmaking tends to be, it's so specific usually based on characters that you reveal things always through a specific individual. But the human rights part really comes in choosing the countries I'm working in and then the subjects. I mean, I guess, I don't know, in Egypt, we didn't make a film about Egyptian cooking, Although you probably could make a human rights film about that too, gender relations, the role of a woman in a household, I don't know, take your pick. So I think it's more just, basically it's a bit, when we look for subjects, there has to be some kind of urgency behind the subject. I had a very nice interview from some of the students before we started the class, and they said, what do you tell a young filmmaker who's just starting out? And I said, well, tell them not to be scared, so they'll conquer their fears of beginning. And also say, look, when you're looking for a subject, make sure that it somehow matters. And make sure it matters to you. That's really important. It comes from a deep place. Even when maybe you'll only figure that out later when you're all done. But basically, make sure those kind of deep drives are in there for you. And then you won't lose your way. So. Yeah.
I think that for me, your films are deeply about human rights because they are about many basic rights of people, like freedom of expression and things like the political rights, for example. I was also wondering, what about the people in your film? Do you think that they also think in such a way? Even if they don't use the notion of rights, but maybe there's something, very human rights about their.
Sorry, I'll just bring my laptop here so we can. Maybe that's a nice actually to show you a clip from the Back to the Square film.
That would be great.
Which is when you talk about characters and you talk about people, basically this feeling that some things are universal that everybody believes in, and I think. For me, a real fundamental one is that everybody inside of them has a sense of justice. Everybody has a feeling, the definitions might change, what I think is right and what you think is wrong might change, but that fundamental feeling that everybody wants to have a sense of justice in their own world and in the world around them is, I think, universal. And maybe I'll show you that in this clip from a young woman named Salwa in Egypt who became quite famous in the first year following the revolution in 2000, after 2011, because she was protesting in Tahrir Square, and she and a bunch of young women were forced to have virginity tests by the army. And she was the only one who was brave enough to speak out to foreign journalists. And then, so we tracked her down, and it took quite a while talking about convincing people to film with them. It took about 2 months to convince Salwa that, you know, we weren't out to hurt her and that maybe she would like to tell her story to us in our film. So let me show you a clip, if you don't mind, number 8. Back to the square Salwa house sequence. And just as the lights dim, the background is, we just went to her house. She said, would you like to come and visit where I'm from, my village? She lived in Cairo, but she was from a small village. And then she said, yeah, great. And we thought when we're there, maybe we'll just do an interview where she would tell us what happened to her in Tahrir Square. So this is what happened. Maybe I just say one thing and then open to some questions. When it comes to storytelling, you can learn most about a person's character when? On one hand, I'm sorry? Yeah, okay. So when they're pushed into a corner, when they're fighting. So in extreme situations, right? Show your true colors. Put you in a difficult situation you never experienced before. We'll really see what you're like, right? But you also learn about people in the most banal, ordinary ways when you're making a film or wanting to learn about someone, right? Salwa changing the light bulb, how proud she is that they have electricity in her house. Or show the amazing fridge. She's so proud that they have a fridge. So, so both ways when you're filming, you always look for something to happen in front of the camera, but and talk about unexpected things. We thought this was just going to be an ordinary interview. We just go to our village and film something and come home, and then this happened. So, yeah. But any questions? How are we doing for time? 10 minutes. Oh boy. Okay. Say your questions quickly. This was one of those cases where it's so dramatic that you kind of don't need a translation. I mean, they barge into the house. They have, you know, village security people. What are we doing there? We were doing filming the interview. We just pivoted the camera on the tripod and kept it running, and stepped away from the camera and acted really dumb. So you could capture this scene because, of course, if they knew you were filming, big problem. Yeah, 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 yeah. Of course, they beat up my assistant. This turned into a riot. The assistant director asking the questions. Omar, he was beaten up. They ripped his shirt off. There's like 200 people outside. You know, because you know, first of all, Salwa is persona non grata in the village, and there's men in a woman's household. I didn't think of that. Talk about cultural sensitivity. I didn't know that her dad wasn't around before we left. So of course you're scared. And then the police came, surprisingly, post the revolution in Egypt, the police came and rescued us and took us to the mayor's house. And then we had big debate about whether we're going to hand over the tapes or not. And then the police had to drive us out and my assistant's car out of the village because the villagers were threatening to torch the car. So we're very lucky. But basically I don't make kind of, danger-driven films. I'm not a war correspondent. I don't like that sort of thing. It's not my thing. I don't. So the danger is really more to the people you're filming with, of course. So Salwa, geez, she wasn't able to go back to her village since we made the film. It's also later how the film progresses, right? Yeah. Anyone else? Maybe, yeah. 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 Yeah.
How do ordinary Burmese people think about life in Burma after Aung San Suu Kyi's party won the election in 2015? Has life changed a lot?
Oh, okay. So the question about politics in Burma, the beginning was the poet says, forget about Aung San Suu Kyi. yeah. It's mixed. You talk to a lot of diplomats, they're very pessimistic about what's happening 1 year after the fact. They say, look, economic growth isn't so great. The lady is a control freak, isn't governing as well, Aung San Suu Kyi, as people would have expected. She's not very collaborative, she's kind of difficult. So that's, one, and not outspoken on the Rohingya issue, criticized about that. Lots of criticisms. I think that's the sort of thing. There was an article in The Guardian like 2 weeks ago giving you this kind of standard Aung San Suu Kyi such a crappy leader argument and Burma's going nowhere. And that's boring. I mean, I just don't think it's not really reflective of the reality, which is much more complicated. She has such a difficult time. The army basically is still in charge of the country. They own everything. They and their cronies, the whole country. Okay. They have a political lockdown on the country still because they have 25% quota in the parliament. You don't even have to vote for the army. They'll get 25% anyway. You want to change the constitution. Guess how many votes you need? More than 75%. So, and the three key ministries, Interior, Defense, and one other one I forget, are also controlled by the army. So it's really, really hard, So what kind of ruler she is, I don't know. But tough situation. On the other hand, the contact we have, Mang On Point, for example, they were able to buy a taxi together with, a business partner while we were filming last year. So you see these kind of, people doing a little bit better than they had in the past. But it's also a country you have to be extremely patient because this expectation that a country that was under dictatorship is going to, transform overnight. I don't know why you would ever think that. And it's a country that was infrastructure completely gutted in 60 years. No healthcare, completely lousy education, no investments in infrastructure, no garbage disposal. The most basic things, no healthcare. So there's a really long way to go. But I'm actually very hopeful about the future of Burma. So, yeah. I think we're running out of time. Let's show you one more clip. Just squeeze one last one in. And this is, let's show clip number 6 from Back to the Square, to hear protest. And this is maybe about storytelling again, about what you can find if you wait. Okay? So this is just, I filmed a lot in Tahrir Square, and this is just watch. It's only a minute, so yeah. I heard the laughter, so I don't need to explain it. Maybe tell us we're running out of time. But I guess remarks, maybe we have a couple of questions still to those who want to be filmmakers here. The longer I do this, the more I see television deformation. People want to tell you stories where the images mean nothing. They're wallpaper, interchangeable crap that you can just exchange and it will make no difference. And people also think that you can tell everything with voiceover. So resist both impulses. That's my cranky old man argument at the end. Try to tell a story using no voiceover. Try to tell a story only through pictures, and try to tell a story where the pictures mean something, where the pictures in front of the camera themselves tell the story. And that's kind of the fun and craft of documentary filmmaking for me. So, okay, that's the end of the pedantic, cranky old man. Do it like this at the end of the show.
I'm very impressed by your use of long shot and also long take in the movie, Burma Storybook. So would you just maybe spend 1 minute to talk about it?
Yeah, film education. I watched all these great fiction films mainly when I was in graduate school. I lived beside a review cinema, so, all the greats, Tarkovsky, wow, amazing. Bela Tar, Hungarian filmmaker, if you know him.
Andrew Tarkovsky.
Yeah, we
Hou
watched.
Xiaoxian.
Yeah, Hou Xiaoxian, one of my favorites too. Amazing. So many things, and you learn from. Bela Tar talks about it, that there's something magical in not cutting. And I think my dream film would really, some people do these, like the one-shot film. They kind of are gimmicks, because it never really works. But that's kind of your dream, that a film would be made without editing. Because there's this kind of magic in the longer and longer you film something. So you know, some scenes. We have time for one more? Another 5-minute clip? We'll do one more. Oh, we got one more in. I'll show you this one. This is when I think for the first time I learned really about the magic and power of holding a take for a long time. So this was a 30-minute take. The editing is a bit crappy now when I look back, 8 years later. But the power of holding one shot for a long time. It's a bit like fishing. I don't know if you like fishing. I don't fish at all, hardly. But I think I empathize with people who do. Basically, the art of cultivating patience when you're filming. So let's show one more clip. This is from a film I made in Iran in 2008 and 9 called Letters to the President. So let's show clip number 11. Okay? And the film was about people talk about cover stories. I convinced the Iranian government to let me make a film about democracy in Iran. And President Ahmadinejad at the time was, of course, a populist, so he said that he was having a letter writing center where he would answer people, ordinary citizens, questions. They could write him a letter and he'd answer and grant their wishes, like Santa Claus. So here's people waiting at the presidential letter writing center in Tehran. We're allowed to do one last question, so a good one. If it's not good, it doesn't count. Any last question? Anybody? Yeah, all the time. That's part of their job. The question was, do you ever lose your hope or you've lost your way when you're making a film? Always. And if you haven't, you won't make a good film. Yeah, you have to. It's part of the adventure. And part of the every time I start a new film, I get terrified. It's like, holy jeez, what are we doing? So always, yeah, always. Otherwise, it would be no good, unfortunately. Which is not to say that you're not confident when you're working, because you are. Of course, you know you're going to make a film. But there's, of course, that side too. It's like, oh, how's this going to work? Oh, I don't know. And yeah, you just continue. As it was through practice, it really is a craft. I have to say that. I'm doing this for almost 15 years now. And the longer I do it, the more respect I have for cinema and also documentary craftsmanship. It really, really is. And I look at this film and think, oh God, who edited that? That's awful. Why didn't I just use only the one best shot of 6 minutes and then throw the rest out? Why are you cutting back to the mullah? That ruins the emotional impact. But okay, that's okay. It's also a normal thing that you're never satisfied with your previous work because you're always trying to improve. But yeah, it's normal to lose your way, particularly when you're doing cinema verite or wanting stuff to happen in front of you. You don't know where it's going to lead. So that, yeah, it's always an adventure, which are always frightening. Yeah. Oh, you have half a question. Doesn't count. Your last half question, yeah. And then I think we have to stop. Yeah.
Hi. So,
Yeah.
Burma Storybook is about poetry, and that's very unique from all your other films. So,
Yeah.
how does that interact with your narration of
okay.
the film?
Yeah, it's funny because you have to write these synopses for the film. You're finished, and then it's like, let's write the synopsis. And it took us a long time. It's like, we started that way, it's about poetry, and then we're like, well, no, it's not really about poetry. It's about something else. And poetry is only the vehicle through which we do the storytelling. So in a way, it's incidental to the subject. But I think you got a little glimmer from the film Anna Anna. Maybe you see some affinities there, even though that's a much more constructed film. In fact, it's the only constructed film I have made so far. It's basically created in the editing room. Not a whole hell of a lot happens in that film, to the contrary. So, and the longer I do this, the more I also look at verite scenes basically as an expression of poetry in ordinary life. So I would argue now, for example, that's the only clip that I took along to show you from Burma Storybook, had we more time, are the boys in the apple tree. And why did I choose that one out of the blue? Because it's a poem. So what does that mean? It means it's expression that it's not based on reason. Because if you would describe it, it sounds idiotic. some boys picking apples inside a tree. Oh yeah, that's going to be really fun to watch. And yet it's so, for me, so special. And you could have a long conversation, what it means to you, or maybe you relate to it differently. So I think that's the relation too. I guess the longer I do this, the more I think poetry and cinema are basically cousins, or maybe sisters, really trying to, even though the language is really, really different. Our initial idea for Burma Storybook was to work with poets and have them collaborate with us and tell us how they think we should translate their poetry into cinematic storytelling. And that didn't work at all. First poet, Mangu Pai, Under the Great Ice Sheet, this poem, towards the end of the film. He's one of the first poets we visited, and we said, okay, we were really inspired by this poem that you wrote, because it's clearly a political poem that tells us how Burma is changing. Under the Great Ice Sheet, a country frozen in time. And he said, no, it was a poem about science fiction, inspired by Spielberg. It was like, okay, yeah, sure. That's the story you told the censors, and maybe you even believe it now, but give me a break. But we worked with him, we visited him for a week in his hometown, and we would do even silly stuff with him, like, okay, let's visit that ice factory, you see the one shot. And we asked him to drag an ice block, through the village streets, and it was fun to film it, but then it doesn't work for a film. So long answer to the very nice short question. A quarter of a question.
What did you do with the other 199 hours?
Oh yeah, well, great question. We're doing an art installation now in Rotterdam at a museum to show you. It's like 17 of the poets reciting their work. And that's I think it's been invited to Singapore now too, so we'll use that there. And basically nothing, but everything. And what I mean by that, this is interesting for people who want to be filmmakers. Really respect all of your material and understand when you're making a film that it's really like a pyramid with a very small peak on a strong foundation. And so it kind of sounds mystical, but all the material that you've cut is actually in the film. Your kind of film stands on that material. And there's, I think, something to that. Yeah. So you have to really love and care for all the material, even though you have to throw a lot of it away. And throwing some of it away, like the scene of the monks in love, is like, that's like cutting your arm off. But that's okay. And you learn that too. I mean, when I made my very first film, I had a 75-minute cut. And then I invited this famous director to come and look at it. It was my very first film. I didn't know anything about filmmaking. He watched it, I'm watching him, and he's like, pretty focused on the film. And then all of a sudden, 40 minutes into it, he starts, tapping his leg. You're like, that's not going well. So he watched the film, he's like, yeah, well, after about 45 minutes, you have to throw out the last half hour. And he was right. Yeah, nice question. I think we're out of time. Before the MC throws me out and turns off my microphone, I just want to say thank you so much for a lovely evening. Please tell anybody who hasn't seen the film that it's also playing on the 15th still. 2 something. I think it's at the Cultural Center. The other thing is we got 10 free tickets from the film festival. Nobody's asked me for any of them. If you want anyone who wants to come and see the film, drop me an email. We'll be at the screening, glad to give you the tickets away. My email is, you can find it on our website, burmastorybook.com, or it's just my name, petrlom@gmail. Yeah? And some of you signed up for the newsletter. If you haven't, you still can, or just look to our website, burmastorybook.com, especially if you're interested in the book, which will be very special. So, what a wonderful evening. I'll shut up. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.